The first series of 2022 is brought to you with the kind support of Herd Capital, a Chicago-based asset manager that invests in public equities in the technology, media, telecommunications, financial, and industrial sectors. The firm was founded in 2011 and manages assets via a long-short fund and a long-only fund. Our next guest believes in listening to learn. Hear how these words from her father guided her to be one of the most effective investor relations professionals that I know. I'm Aoife Devitt, and welcome to the 50 Faces podcast, a podcast committed to revealing the richness and diversity of the world of investment by focusing on its people and their stories. I'm joined today by Kimberly Smith, who is Head of Capital Formation at Techstars. She was previously Director of Marketing and Investor Relations at Owl Creek Asset Management, and before that worked at Davidson, Kempner and ABN AMRO. She holds a number of board roles and is an active advocate for education. Welcome, Kimberly. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Ethan. Thank you for having me.
Well, I've known you for well over a decade, and you've always been one of the preeminent voices in hedge fund investor relations and business development. Can you start by telling us your journey into this area?
That's a great question, and it's interesting because it gave me time to reflect on how I fell into this role. But I started out my career actually in politics, which maybe was a good background and good framework for me to eventually build a career on Wall Street and investor relations and hedge fund marketing. But I spent time working for my local congressman throughout college. And then I sort of fell into a Wall Street role. I had started my career at Ziff Brothers right after they sold Ziff Davis Publishing, and the Sons decided they did not want to pursue a publishing career and wanted to pursue an investment career. And at the time, I had already committed to work in politics and realized that wasn't for me. And I kind of fell into a Wall Street role. Over several years after I left Ziff Brothers and I went to work for ABN AMRO, I really wanted to become a client-facing person and work in marketing and sales. And over the time and went on this journey was really just by trial and error. I had 2 jobs early in my career where I was jack of all trade, kind of master of none. And I really wanted to focus myself after seeing this interaction with salespeople on the trading desk at ABN AMRO, that's how I wanted to spend the rest of my working career. And I went for it. I got a job at Davidson, Kempner, and then Owl Creek. And now I've recently joined Techstars, all in the client face and client relations, investor relations role, as well as marketing and business development. But I saw what I wanted and I went for it.
Well, that's wonderful. I'm going to certainly ask for some of your secrets in terms of how you've become such an effective link between the clients and the investors. But just before that, going back, where did you grow up and what did you study before you entered your career in politics?
So I grew up in New York City, born and raised. In fact, I still live in my childhood apartment, which is kind of funny. And I'm raising my children there. But I grew up in Manhattan on the Upper West Side. I went to Middlebury College and I studied international relations and economics. And so that's how I started my journey, hence why I initially thought I was going to pursue a career in politics. But ultimately, my path led me in a different direction.
So you spoke about your passion for investor relations and pursuing that. What has been your secret? Because as I mentioned, you've always been very well known to me from the very time I started working as an investor in hedge funds. What has been your secret to, I suppose, building those relationships with clients, nurturing them, and telling the story of the fund that you represent?
A few things. I learned, and one of the things I say often is listen to learn. And I got that from my father, who, as you know, is a role model for me. But what I noticed early on, particularly at my days at ABN AMRO, where I sat on a trading desk, and I heard sometimes some of the salespeople, they weren't listening to their clients. And not to say they were bad salespeople, and it was a different market because we were trading energy and coffee, sugar, cocoa, but sometimes we weren't listening to our clients and getting from them what they want. And then in that case, we ended up losing relationships because we were pushing what we wanted from them. And it was a really early lesson because I was the youngest person on the trading desk, and essentially I was a business analyst, and I would go through the P&L and all the salespeople. So I was very much the least favorite person on that trading desk. But what I noticed was successful salespeople, ones that did well, were those who had relationships with clients, that weren't always calling to sell something, that were spending time not talking, but listening. That those were the successful salespeople, not the fast talkers, not the guys with the fastest cars. It was those that took a moment and took a breath to really understand the client and their needs. And most importantly, not always call when they have a product to sell. I can think of this guy on the desk that was super successful. He was probably the most understated person on our trading desk, but he was also the most successful person on our trading desk because he really listened to clients. And that has stayed with me for the last 20 plus years.
Some really interesting advice there. Do you think that people can, say maybe mid-career, do you think that they can learn to be better listeners?
It's really an interesting question and something I struggle with my kids. So trying to get them to start off early to understand the most successful people in any industry are those that listen. And I have been doing a little bit of coaching, particularly for veterans that are transitioning from the military service to roles similar to ours on the investment side and in various capacities, whether it's chief of staff or other roles within the investment management sector. And it's my number one piece of advice. You're not going to know everything. There's going to be someone at the table that thinks they know everything. And there's going to be someone in between. But the importance of being able to listen to whoever your client is, and that could be your boss, could be your client in that respect, I think is important. And I do think that people can change the way they behave to become better salespeople, to become better relationship people, to become better at home. It really is about understanding your client, your partner, your boss's needs, and how best you can help them help you grow a business or be a better parent or whatever it is. But it's really important. And I do think as I've been talking to these young, mainly men that are transitioning, who have actually kind of used to be getting orders and listening, it's something that actually really resonates with them. So I do think you could do that later in your career, but you have to be like anything else. One has to be willing to take that step back.
Really interesting advice, I think, not just for career-wise, but for life in general. Moving to the investment world now, so you've been in it for some time. What do you like most about the world of investment?
The excitement. I mean, I still follow the equity market. Before we got on, I was watching CNBC to see the impact the market will make based on the new COVID variant. And so I love that how news rates it and affects the financial market. I think that's super exciting. I also like being around people that want to create businesses. It's so amazing to me that people can sit in their room and come up with this idea. Uber, who knew that I would never have to go on a business trip and rent a car again when I started out in this business? And someone came up with this idea. I mean, it's these little things that have made our life much more efficient. But being around that, being around entrepreneurs, seeing how their impact affects others in the world, and then see it come to reality via the equity markets, I find it really exciting and exhilarating and nerve-wracking at times.
And what were your thoughts on the diversity in the industry? And you've obviously seen the industry now for a few decades. So how have you seen the diversity evolve, and where do you think we are now if you were to give it a scorecard?
Oh, probably not so great. I mean, when I started at ABN AMRO in 1998, there were 2 women on the trading desk of probably 100 that weren't admins. And even one of our admins was a man. And I was the only woman of color. I was the only person of color on a 100-person trading desk in 1998. And when I left in 2000, I was still the only person of color. And there was another woman. There were 3 women on the trading desk at that point that had professional level positions. And so diversity is definitely, I think, a challenge. something that I have personally been giving a lot of thought to. And one of my other roles is I chair an investment committee, and I have been hyper focused on diversifying our manager base, particularly for women and people of color. And it's proven very difficult. So I have spent a lot thinking, how can I, as someone that has access to capital and relationships, how can I make a change to further impact diversity on Wall Street and the financial services sector? And so it's gotten better, but it's nowhere near it needs to be. And I do think the onus is on a lot of these big companies to help change that. When I sit in my seat as an investment committee chair, it's really hard to find a vast number of managers, whether they're women or people of color, to allocate capital to bring to my investment committee as a fiduciary to make sure that we're covering the whole sector or asset class. And so we need to do better at mentoring, giving people these opportunities earlier so that they do have the ability to run funds later in life. And so today, going back to your question, what's the score? Where I think when I started in this business over 20 years ago, it was close to, 1 or 2 out of 10, maybe we're at a 5. And I think we can do better. Other industries have done better. And I think the investment management sector is lagging that. I think they're trying to catch up now, which is great. And they're putting a lot of time and resources on throwing capital at it, but we need to do better.
I'd love to just go back to your mindset back when you were one of the only women and people of color on that trading floor. Were you conscious of that at that time? Because I often think some young people are just focused on doing their job and networking. Did the absence of role models who looked like you, did that affect you, or was that something that you only had to look back on later?
I mean, I definitely was conscious of the fact that I was the only woman of color on the desk. And I think that there were people that were very conscious of it in good and bad ways, to be perfectly candid with you. And I didn't really have a role model that looked like me, but I had definitely a lot of advocates. And so I can't say that I felt alone, but I will tell you that I was always the first one there. And even if I wasn't trading that day and I had my business analyst hat on, I was still the first one there before the markets opened, before anyone got on the desk. And I was probably the last one there 90% of the time. And the only why I say 90 and not 100 is because I was going to business school at night. So there were some days I needed to leave early, but I definitely felt at the time I needed to work longer, harder, and definitely, I loathe to use this word, but definitely show more face time on the desk than others did. Others with probably less experience, less seniority, and that were more or less my peers, but I certainly felt that I needed to work harder than everybody else. I felt like I needed to prove myself. I'm doing that more, Ethan, to your point, was more of a post-mortem as I've been reflecting on my career, that I did try to outwork, and I'm using air quotes, but outwork others because I felt different.
It's really interesting, isn't it? I suppose I would look back on that type of, and I would have experienced something similar, but not quite with the same numbers, I suppose. But looking back, it seems, I wish I didn't have to maybe outwork, but it's the fact that you outworked probably that's contributed to your success. So it's kind of, I suppose I look back on that with kind of mixed feelings. I'm not sure how you look back. Do you regret any of that outworking?
Well, I only regret it more recently, not at the time. I mean, I had goals and I was ambitious and I wanted to make something of my career. That was definitely a big focus of mine. I'd say I definitely have gotten into a rhythm, even now, later in life, that work is definitely a big priority for me. It's important to me. And to your point, I don't mind being the hardest person in the room. In fact, I want to be. But sometimes when others are golfing or tennising or doing pottery, I definitely probably have less hobbies that others my age have. And I probably contributed to spending a lot of time working as my younger self, and that built my personality. I definitely grew up in a household like that as well, where people worked hard and that was part of your quote unquote value. And so, listen, I like working. I don't mind it. I think I would kind of shrivel up inside without working. But do I look back on it and say it was a mistake? No, I wouldn't have done it. But I definitely think there was something like an implicit, I don't know if it's implicit bias, but definitely something that made me really feel, especially at that point in my life, that I needed to prove myself. Now I'm much more comfortable leaving work, going to my kids' soccer game and coming back and working. Whereas I wasn't that person 20 years ago. I wasn't that person 10 years ago. And so I've matured, but maybe not better.
Well, I mean, I'd love to segue there now to some of your other rich aspects of your work life, because you have a number of board roles. So let's just talk about that first. So what do you try to bring to those board roles, and what do you think makes an effective board member?
Well, he's someone that can contribute. And I'm not talking about your treasure. It's the time, the ability to engage. I've noticed there are a lot of people that want to be on boards. But to me, if I'm going to commit to a board, a non-for-profit board, or even I'm on a private company board, it's important that you show up. And really, why you were chosen to be on boards is your experience and your knowledge, and to help those in the not-for-profit sector or someone that's a new entrepreneur, to give them support and to help them grow and to help the organization grow. And so it's really important not just to show up to meetings, but to prepare for meetings and to opine on issues and situations that you have real knowledge on. I think what is not great is when people kind of zoom in and out. The non-for-profit, the private company, the public company, no one deserves that. Right? We're all working towards a common goal, which is success of the nonprofit, success of the portfolio company, success of the public company. But not being fully engaged in those endeavors is actually net to me very detrimental. And so I think it's really important when you decide to join a non-for-profit board or any board that A, you're passionate about it, B, you're willing to engage, C, you're willing to learn. Right? There's always going to be something, no matter how old you are, no matter how much experience you are, there's something new you learn every single day. And so going in with that open-mindedness is all very important, but really being committed is step one, because sometimes I see in board members people that are less committed, and it kind of brings down the rest of the board. And so my advice to anyone considering being on a non-for-profit, it's a commitment. You have to love it. You have to be open-minded, and you have to be willing to do the work.
That's great advice there. I often find sometimes women have a slightly harder time on boards, because many women find that some boards are actually looking for just simply yes people. They're actually not looking for anybody to present challenge. And I know the number of the women I know who are looking for board positions are extremely committed to doing the work, being diligent, and presenting challenge, which they see as their role. And it can sometimes be a tricky one, because that can sometimes exclude them because they've known to be too picky, perhaps. So it is interesting.
I mean, I think that's right. And I think that there's sometimes now with this diversity push where some people are super into it and really understand the importance of having women and minorities on boards and how their diverse voice will help them succeed. But I think to your point, there are also people that want women and minorities on boards for diversity's sake and don't want them to opine on issues. And that's not going to work. That's not going to be successful for any organization that wants to succeed in the long term, because if someone is committed to being on a board, their voice matters, and every voice should matter. And I do notice that sometimes. I also notice that women feel like they need to yes, or they're afraid to speak. And one of the things I've noticed often, particularly early in my board roles, is that sometimes women get talked over and interrupted. One of the things I do at the start of board meetings is I lay ground rules. And I'm sure there's some back channeling texts that probably call me mom, and I'll own that title and I'll wear it very proudly. But I always say, we are here for a reason. everybody has a voice at this table, and do not interrupt when people are speaking. Wait your turn. Everybody will have a turn. And if people do interrupt, I will interrupt them. But I do that intentionally because otherwise people start to talk over each other and the message gets diluted. And I think it's really important that everybody, regardless of gender and race, that has a seat at the table gets a voice at the table, because those are two different things. Having a seat at the table is important, but having a voice at the table is equally important. And I really try to set the tone at my board work.
Really sound advice there. Well, just moving from the mom role, maybe perhaps to your passion for education. Can you talk a little bit about that? Where did that arise and what are you doing in the educational sphere right now?
I am very passionate about education. My grandmother was illiterate and she worked as a domestic in upstate New York to provide for my father and his brothers. And she was smart, but at that time, people of color, people that were in poverty, the ability to learn to read and write and things you and I take advantage of was not a right, was not a given opportunity. If anything, families looked at it as a cost because that means the child couldn't provide for their brothers and sisters and the rest of the family. And so knowing that my grandmother, who was a single mom to 3 boys, spent her whole life working for a family to provide for my father and his brothers so that they had the opportunity to go to school. They all worked after school and throughout high school and through college, but she was able to set it up so that they didn't have to drop out of school to support the family, although that meant a lot of sacrifices, a lot of mommy time sacrifices that we definitely take advantage of. But it gave her the ability, when my father graduated from high school as the first Black president at Arlington High School, captain of teams, the ability to go to Howard University in DC when that seemed so out of the question, seemed like completely unobtainable. With the importance of, she said this to him as he got on the bus to go to DC from Poughkeepsie, she gave him $20. And that $20 was the heaviest $20 because he knew by taking that $20 that his brothers and his mom were probably not going to have substantial food and anything else outside of it for a while, because that was a lot of money. And so it was a very heavy $20. And she gave it to him with the bus ticket and said, "Don't ever come back here. There's nothing for you here. You've done really well, but it's time for you to leave the nest." And so he left excited to go to Howard, which was first person in his family ever to go to college, first person in his family to graduate from high school, but with this really heavy $20. And someone said to me, well, if you think about that, he went to Howard, joined the military, went back to Howard for dental school, went back to the military, went to Columbia and got his master's in public administration, the ability to send me to the top schools in the country. That $20 really compounded over those 50 plus years. I'm not sure he thought about that. I think it weighed heavy on him, but how he was able to get from Poughkeepsie, New York to New York City to have a daughter that was able to work on Wall Street without college debt or high school debt was because of the value of education. And that has been instilled in me from the time I was like a very young girl. I was separated a lot from my father, so I could go to school and he could work. So I got a good education. And I do the same for my children, but I see the importance. My father grew up in a home with an outhouse. And the only time my father was able to go to the bathroom inside was at school. And so the value of education to go from pretty much a shack in Poughkeepsie, New York, to being able to send his child to college debt-free was because of education. And that's really why I'm passionate. It changes lives. It changed his life. It's changed my life. And I want to make sure as I hit the second phase of my life that I'm able to give a similar impact, not just to my own children, but to others, and really inspire people to go to school and listen to learn and become entrepreneurs and go to Wall Street and chase your dreams, but some of that basic building blocks happens because of education. And so I am, as you can tell, very passionate about making sure we're able to get children in schools, learn to read, learn math, learn financial literacy. It's definitely something I'm very passionate about. And I do think it leads to success. I think it's also important to note, Ethan, if you don't know how to read at third grade, so by age 9, it is one of the key indicators of poverty. And so getting kids in school at an early age is definitely one of the things I'm most passionate about. And obviously the ability to continue. But thinking about that, 9 years old, if you don't have those building blocks to read, you are on a trajectory to potentially live in poverty the rest of your life. Your life could be planned out at age 9. And I think that's a frightening statistic that people don't know and really need to think about as we think about our youth, particularly post-COVID, and how we want to continue to support those that have less than us.
Well, there's nothing really I can add to that extremely powerful set of facts. And your passion is very clear. So I think we are privileged to have someone like you spending as much time on this cause. So thank you. And I know that story is not the first time I've heard it, because it was part of a very powerful LinkedIn post that I think went viral that really attracted my attention. So I'll put a link in the show notes to that post because it really was very powerful. You mentioned your father as being a key role model in your life, and clearly your grandmother too. Were there other key people who influenced you across the course of your career, and in what way?
One of the people who has really been an influence on my life is my high school English and history teacher and advisor, Bob Montera, who is still teaches at the school that I'm on the board of and my children are at. And he really believed in me before I believed in myself. Even when I had successes in high school, I think I definitely had a level of self-doubt. And he would never let me doubt myself. He always made me want to be my best self. And this was so random. This is kind of a random story, but I was the first person in my class to get into college. And I found out just by happenstance, because I was at some event and the admissions director at Middlebury was there. And she's like, I have to tell you, you're in. And so I found out before early decision, before I got my letter, I got into college. And I told Bob at the time that I got in, and I was so nervous about it. And you're 18-year-olds making these very adult decisions, in my opinion. At least it felt like that at the time. And it's an academically rigorous school. It's really small. It's not 200 people in a class. I had classes with 8 students. It's so you had to show up. You had to be prepared, which was probably started my lessons in always being prepared. But when people found out that I got in early and that I got into this school, and I don't know if it was jealousy or whatever, I really started to doubt myself. And he pulled me aside, and I can tell you exactly where I was. I was in, for any Fieldston people that listen to this, I was in the 200s building, and he pulled me aside and said, they wouldn't have accepted you if they didn't think you could handle the work, and that you deserve to be there. And you can't listen to everybody's opinions on things. You just know that experts chose you to attend this school, not your peers, not people in the hallway, and that you need to believe in yourself the same way they believed in you. And it really made me block out the noise for the rest of the year. And then sometimes as I move forward, listen, not everybody's going to like you, and that's okay, but you have to just believe in yourself. And he gave that to me. And so Bob is still very much a part of my life. And sometimes he still edits my papers. If I need someone to wordsmith it, or I've at a loss for words on something, he helps me find them. And so he's still very much part of my life.
Well, that's so important, I think, to have people with high expectations and advocates for you. And certainly, as you mentioned, that can often be a critical time, even if you are a first-generation college student and you've made it there, is actually staying there and thriving there is not a given. So having that support is so important. Looking at any maybe key pieces of advice or creed or motto that you live by, besides the wonderful listen to learn, which I have written down and will be trying to embody in my own life, is there anything else that you can share?
I think one of the things, and I think I found this definitely in my older self, is be able to have a voice, be able to substantiate it. But I think what's important is to really stand up for what you believe in and not just agree. I truly don't believe people want people to agree with you all of the time. To your earlier point, I think it's really important for women and people of color to have opinions and the ability to express them. But I really, as I've gotten older, I think it's become very important to me to stand up for what I believe in, even if it's not popular, to block the noise, but really just do the work, create your thesis, and stand by it.
Very profound. And then looking back to your younger self, sort of already visualizing you in those corridors at the school there and in your small classroom setting, any advice that you might have for your younger self? Anything that you wish you had known then that you know now?
I think the biggest thing is the confidence thing. And I don't mean it in the way that I think some parts of our society have become very singular, very me-oriented. I think the confidence to have a voice, to have that voice in a group, because you're always better as a team to get to your goal, and the ability to really interweave that with what you believe in. Like, I definitely, as I reflect on our conversation this morning, I think of many times I agreed to things, particularly my younger self, that I wholeheartedly disagreed with. But I was in a setting where I felt I had to go along with status quo. And that's a confidence thing. I think when I was younger, probably even in those ABN AMRO trading desk days, I was killing myself working without asking for help or teamwork. That's not success, right? To me, success is not I, success is we, and pulling everybody up. But I don't think I recognized that at the time. And then circling back, I think it's all very circular. It's just like standing up for what's important to you. What do you believe in? If you've done the work, what do you believe is the right outcome? And I think those pieces at the core have one theme. It's confidence in yourself. And I didn't have that as a young person. I definitely grew over time, but I really think the ability to be confident in yourself and being able to explain why you're confident in yourself, do your work, not just talk, I think it's really important. And I definitely, as I reflect and I think about many situations that over the years that I probably regret then and now, it was due to lack of confidence.
Well, I think those are some powerful words on which to end this. You are such a strong figure and you're prodigious in terms of the organizations that you are involved in, and your passion is really palpable. So it's been an inspiration to talk with you here, and thank you for coming and sharing your insights with us.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
I'm Aoife Devitt. Thank you for listening to the 50 Faces podcast. If you liked what you heard and would like to tune in to hear more inspiring investors and their personal journeys, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be construed as investment advice, and all views are personal and should not be attributed to the organizations and affiliations of the host or any guest.